All right, my name is Tamera Macy, and I am doing a interview with Jennifer Barker. She is a code enforcement officer for the Planning and Development Services Department for San Diego County. This project is for our International Systems and Codes Class 145. So, hi Jennifer, how are
Hi,
you today?
doing well.
First of all, I want to thank you so very much for letting us come to you and ask you these questions.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. First of all, I'll ask you a couple of questions, and please elaborate on whatever information you have for us, because we're beginners here, and any information you could give us would be wonderful. Okay, the first question I have is, what led you to become a code officer?
Prior to becoming a code enforcement officer, I was actually an animal control officer for about 8 years. And I was looking for a change, and I had gotten injured as an animal control officer. Just kind of looking for a little something different, but it allowed me still the opportunity to do investigations, have field work, and be able to do something for the community. So luckily I work for the County of San Diego, which is a large organization, and there are lots of opportunities to move through the different departments, and found the opening for code enforcement officer and thought that sounded like a interesting challenge.
Oh, that's especially the animal control. That's amazing.
Because back with animal control, we did a lot of code enforcement. It was just animal-related codes only. And this, we do some animal-related codes, but we branch out to building codes and a lot of other code-related issues.
Okay, great. Thank you. What does a typical day on the job look like for you?
It varies a lot day to day. And what's pretty nice is I do have a lot of freedom to be able to create a schedule of how I'm going to work my day, whether or not I'm going to have a day where I'm out in the field doing site visits all day long, or if it's a day where I'm going to be in the office taking care of paperwork, or a mix of both of them. On a field day, I could be all over and anywhere from pretty much all the borders of San Diego County, which is pretty large. I remember one day I went to Spring Valley first, ended up Julian, Warner Springs, Ramona, and then came back to the office. So, there's quite a large area that we cover. We do try to strategize it so that it is, as efficient as possible and handle cases, within a certain smaller area typically. But there are days where you're all over the place, and there are days that you're completely in the office all day.
And do you have a partner with you, or do you work alone?
Work alone typically.
Work alone?
Yes.
Okay, and so this is not a typical 8-hour-a-day job. You could start, what time is your usual starting hours?
It is actually a pretty steady 8-hour-a-day job, yeah. And we're really pretty good about budgeting time as far as that's concerned. So you have to know where you're going and what time you need to leave, so that you know what time you need to get back for that, to make sure you go home and on time. We do have the opportunity to do an alternative work schedule, so you can work an 8 or a 10-hour day here.
Oh, okay.
I personally work 8 hours, so I work Monday through Friday, and then I work 6:30 to 3.
Okay. Oh, those are good hours.
Yeah, those are good hours.
Great. What is the best part about your job?
Best part about my job is, there's two things. I love my team here. We have just the coolest group of people. Everybody that's been hired in as a code officer has a pretty different background. There's a couple people that were police officers prior to coming over here. There's a couple people, one of them was a DMV investigator, some child support, environmental health. So there's a ton of knowledge that each person brings to the table, and we work together real well. And we have that freedom to work together to make sure that we're looking at all of these different aspects. And then the other part of it that I love is being able to work on these projects that, you go out to a case and there's a problem and you're getting some sort of resolution. Mm-hmm. So even though I work by myself, and I am by myself in the field, if I need somebody else's expertise, I'm able to rely on my coworkers who are right there in the office and always super willing to give me a hand with that.
Do you ever find yourself in any type of danger, whether physically from a building or someone living out in the building that,
Yeah, we go to some really, really remote locations where there's no cell service, and there's not always somebody that is with you. If we are going to a place that we know is dangerous or we know could pose some sort of major problem for us, then oftentimes we will have another officer come. We do have a couple individuals that we know when we go out to that property, we want to have someone there with us. And we are provided with radios now, so we can contact someone, let them know, hey, I'm going on a questionable property. This is where I am, just in case, because there have been some incidences recently in Utah where a code enforcement officer was killed.
Oh.
So we want to, safety is very important to the county in general, and so we as officers make sure that we're very aware of our situation, we're very aware of our surroundings, and we do everything we can to make sure that we're operating safely.
Okay. And that was going to be, one of my questions, what is the hardest part about your job, which I think is what you just answered, but physically, do you have to crawl around on your knees? Do you have to climb up in the ceilings, roofs, up on ladders?
Sometimes physically, some of the hardest things of my job, my personal area that I've been working more recently, is I've been dealing with homeless encampments on private property. So some of those are in extremely remote locations, and the terrain is interesting sometimes. There's been some very steep terrain, and then even the difficulty of having logistics of getting the items out. We had a canyon that it was very steep on both sides, and over the course of 9 years that these people had lived there, they brought so much stuff, probably more stuff than I have in my house, probably more stuff than most people have in their houses, are in this outdoor encampment. And I would hazard to say it was more like a hoarding type situation, and if it was inside, it would be pretty obvious, but it was outside all over the place. There's a stream running through it, and steep hills. So, the logistics of getting that cleaned out are difficult in and of itself. And then maintaining, going down and checking on what's going on down there. You're kind of going into a questionable area, so obviously, safety again.
Right.
So we tend to have another officer with us because you have the possibility of people being a problem, and then you have the possibility of just having an accident from the terrain.
So what happened to the people? What do you do to prevent them either from coming back? Where do they go? Or are they given some type of information on, programs that they could go into that could prevent them from having to do this again? Or?
Yeah, we actually were going out with several other departments when we were doing this, and there was vouchers, hotel vouchers available. There were different programs that they would qualify for, not depending on what they wanted to do. There was some sobriety type programs that they could get into. They could find more permanent housing type programs. So they got them into a hotel initially, and then started offering them services as they were interested in them. Good. So we did have a whole team. We had Health and Human Services. We had some nurses come along and give hepatitis A vaccines at the time. We had the Sheriff's Department was with us for safety, and because most of them have an understanding of who's and what location and whatnot, so we would work closely with the Sheriff's Department. And then our role, a lot of it, was facilitating all of those interactions, plus working with the property owner to make sure that those the situation was resolved, right. And then getting all the resources together.
Okay.
So.
Well, it sounds like you have a very exciting day every once
in
a while. Yes. What is the best way as a designer to increase the likelihood of passing inspections?
I think knowing your codes, and the ones that you don't know where to find them. Because there are a lot of codes that pertain to the California Building Code is a particularly large book, and then you have the regulatory ordinances, and so there's a lot of different codes that you're going to come across. So knowing what permit exemptions are allowed is a good way to start, so that you know that, hey, I don't need a permit for this particular work, or I do need a permit for this particular work, and then knowing where to find the information, because that book will always be available to you, and so whether or not you actually memorize every single one of them, you know where to go to get that information.
Okay. And besides there being a book, is there a computer app that you go to on your desktop and
we use
just in case
just in case there's.
Yeah.
I tend to go to the, we're lucky enough that we have the building inspectors in our building on a different floor. So we tend to go and talk to somebody at building or the building counter and go ahead and get the information from them, because a lot of them, they are very knowledgeable in that. They've had lots of experience with it. They have lots of knowledge with it. So we're able to rely on their knowledge so that we can kind of keep moving forward in all the directions that we do. Like I said before, we talk about being a jack of all trades and a master at none. Well, our mastery is actually resourcing, figuring out how to get that information or how to make something happen. That's kind of what we end up being masters in, and then everything else we pick up as we go along.
Okay. Let's see. What is your advice to designers to be successful when it comes to following a code?
If you're aware of what the code is as far as following it, then that way you have a working knowledge of where you're going to go with it. If you are aware and you can work within that code, then you're going to know what you can and cannot do. Especially, most of our problem is when people get a permit or don't get a permit. So as long as you know kind of what you do, you know whether or not that needs a permit. So like I said, knowing the exemptions is a good way to start, because you don't want to go in and say, hey, I want to take out this wall, and then do it, and then haven't gotten that permit for it. And you don't need to go get a permit if you're just going to put in, a new sink or a new countertop. It's definitely a different situation.
Okay. And at what point would we go into and decide that we actually will need someone like you to come out, and help us with
determine if you need a permit or not?
Yes.
What you could actually do is, if you get into a situation where you're just really not sure this is what you have envisioned for whatever project that you're working on, and you do have questions about that, our zoning department always pre-checks plans and everything. So you can go to them and talk about what you're, and they have a phone number too, so you can call, talk to our zoning department, find out, say, hey, this is what I'm thinking I'm going to do. Do I need to get a permit or anything like that? And then they can give you the specifics on how to move forward if that is required.
Okay. And or what are the most important items you look out for when we have plans or doing a walkthrough inspection? What do you look for? How do you know that you're going, something very obvious? Do you really go out of your way to look to see if there is something in a new building design or a retrofitted design?
With the new building designs, I'm not involved in it so much, because for my portion of what we do is complaint-based. If somebody called, made a complaint, said, hey, there's a violation of, a room addition on this property, or a garage conversion, something of that nature. So I'll go out and verify whether or not there has been a room addition or garage conversion, and that's kind of what I'm keeping my eye out for. So,
Okay.
As far as the new structures, we have building inspectors that go out, and that's part of the permit process, is they'll go out and check the electrical, they'll go out and check the structural, they'll go out and check, all the different stages of erecting that new building. So there's no need for a code enforcement officer to come out, because it's already been inspected by another professional that is more of an expert in that particular area anyway.
Okay. And how does the Planning and Development Service Department make sure a code violation has been fixed? Example, fire danger, structural, wiring, etc.
So we usually work with the property owners. A lot of these violations do require permits. Some of them don't, depending on what violation is actually what the violation is actually about. We deal with everything from solid waste, which is people just leaving trash in their yard, all the way through building violations and a bunch of variety in between. So sometimes it's a matter of just going by and taking a picture and verifying that the item has been removed. Sometimes it's a matter of making sure that they've obtained permits. And in that permitting process, again, the building inspectors will go verify the safety of everything, but we have to make sure that they got a permit. And during that permit process is when the violation gets resolved. Once they have obtained the permit, then as code enforcement officers, we do not continue to do enforcement until they choose not to continue with that permit or that permit expires.
Okay. Right.
Because during that time frame, they're working with another professional to make sure the safety, and that takes a lot of time. So.
Okay. What kind of fines can be imposed if they don't take care of it? Is there a certain time limit? And what is the time limit? And is that done according to how dangerous a situation can be?
Absolutely. So there is the time limit would, again, based on how dangerous a situation could be. It also varies depending on what kind of violation it is. For building type violations, they usually get about 30 days. They have about 10 days or so to decide how they want to move forward with it, and then 30 days to get a licensed professional to agree to work on their project. And then after that, we have a compliance schedule that we kind of just go down the list and help them meet those guidelines. Those guidelines are oftentimes thrown out the window when we reevaluate as as the situation progresses, because sometimes the engineer will have to draw up different plans, or there's always complications like that, and we always work with the property owners and the engineers and designers during that time frame to make sure, as long as we're making forward motion and we're trying to go ahead and get the resolution, that we're not having unrealistic expectations of it getting done. So I had somebody, their engineer got cancer in the middle of their project, and they had to, so there's definitely some situations where it takes longer than what we expect, but as long as we're working towards a goal, we want to make sure that that safety is being monitored, and that we are working with the property owner on that. We have property owners that don't want to comply, and we do have tools that help us try and gain their compliance. We have, initially we send out an administrative warning that gives them the opportunity to be aware that they have a violation on their property, and it kind of outlines what the possible outcomes of that would be if they choose not to come into compliance. At that point, a lot of times they'll call us, we'll work together and kind of get it squared away what our plan is moving forward. But if they don't, and we go back out and there's still a violation on the property, we'll start sending them citations. And the citations for us are administrative, so they're a fine. And the property owner has the right to appeal that if they want. We can go through a hearing process or whatnot. Citations start out at $100. Then they go to $200, then $500, then they're $1,000 per citation.
Oh, goodness.
We can issue up to $10,000 in citations for the property, and then we can issue also civil penalties. So if they're really digging their heels, not wanting to move forward, and we can prove that it is a violation and why it is an impactful violation to the community, we can issue civil penalties that could be up to $50,000 per violation per year. So one of the examples that we've done civil penalties on is marijuana dispensaries, the illegal marijuana dispensaries. The County of San Diego put a moratorium on marijuana dispensaries, and they allowed the ones that they had in business already, that were already permitted and already allowed, they're allowing them 5 years to go ahead and do their business and get out of business in the county. But they decided that no new marijuana dispensaries can be open. But as soon as the marijuana started to become legal recreationally, we have marijuana dispensaries popping up on a lot of different street corners. So they make a lot of modifications to the building when they move in. Some of them have a lot of electricity, depending on what they're doing.
Right.
Some of them use a lot of different electricity, and they'll upgrade things without permitting that, which tends to be a fire hazard.
Correct.
The actual dispensaries themselves will put in like a wall to have a security guard behind a wall to allow people to come in. They'll have doors that lock behind you, so you can't get out of it. So it's a fire, it's a egress issue. And so there's a lot of modification that they do inside the building that is dangerous to the customers, it's dangerous to the community, and it's dangerous to everybody that's involved. So we are a little bit harder going after something that has that much impact on so many people.
Right, and that would be dangerous, especially the egress part, and especially if you have faulty wiring.
Yeah. And then we also have like abatement is another option that we can use. And if the problem is so substantial and the property owner is unwilling to take care of it, then we'll hire a contractor to go in and clean it up. Usually it's more of a solid waste type issue where there's just trash and junk everywhere. We'll hire a contractor to go in and clean it up, and then the property owner is responsible for paying that bill. We have a hearing afterwards that they can determine whether or not, they can appeal the fine, or essentially the fine, and then if they choose not to, they are responsible for that entire payment.
So what do you do in cases of hoarding issues where you have there's an aisle to walk by, possibly in a home. Obviously, that's a fire, hazard. Things could fall down on people. How do you go about doing something like that? Does someone have to call in?
Yeah, for us, we're entirely complaint based. But that complaint can come from a lot of different sources. I mean, we do work with a lot of different agencies, so we'll go out with vector control. They'll go out on a rat situation, they'll have us come look at the solid waste. We'll go out with the sheriff's department. They'll go out on any sort of situation and then call us in and say, hey, I think you might want to take a look at this and this. With a hoarding type situation, the way our department, code enforcement, is very different and depends on your jurisdiction, what you enforce. For us, we mostly enforce things that are on the outside of the home, other than somebody making a garage conversion or doing something that requires a permit. But the way that they're maintaining their home would be more like substandard housing. And we don't actually do that within code enforcement here. Department of Environmental Services tends to do it. But if they're not renting the home to someone else, they're not subjecting anyone else. A lot of times everybody's kind of wondering how to move forward with it too. Okay. The fire department has a role, environmental health has a role, and they tend to be the ones that lead the inside hoarding. And as soon as the hoarding goes to the outside of the property, which it oftentimes does, that's where we come in as well.
Okay. And what are some examples of dangerous building code violations that you have personally seen?
I had one property that I went out on, and they had a whole bunch of cargo containers. And you know what I'm talking about, right?
Like from the planes?
The ones that they put on the ships that they stack
up?
Oh,
yes.
And then people put them on their properties sometimes. So they had a bunch of those. And those in and of themselves do require a permit because they are structures larger than 120 square feet. But the people that were on this particular property had them set up as little apartments. And so there were rows of them. And they had just a cutout with a door put into them. They had a little air conditioner hole cut out and then the little air conditioner box put into it. And that's pretty significantly dangerous. The boxes aren't meant to house people the way that they're designed. Right. I mean, you can modify them to become a dwelling or whatever if you put enough work into it. But the way that they are, they're not supposed to be a habitable structure.
And there isn't any running water.
Right. They actually had plumbing put into
they did
them.
Have
yeah.
So
okay. I don't think they had a heater, but they did have plumbing put to them. You could see like the wires coming into each one.
Oh goodness.
So that is one of them.
You get electrocuted, if you don't have a grounding wire.
Exactly. So I had another one. It was marijuana dispensary, and they brought in a trailer, like just a office trailer, onto a vacant parcel, and just plopped it in the middle of the vacant parcel. Put up lights in the parking lot of the vacant parcel, and just started opening up to sell marijuana out of it. They had their septic going into a little tank that was sitting on the ground. They had the electricity they were stealing from the house next door. They had wires coming over that they spliced and brought it over, so that they were powering all their outside lights and the dispensary itself off of that. And the wires that they were having come in from the other property were going through trees. So the fire danger was fairly significant with that one as well.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
People.
And then I've had somebody put on a second and third story of a house without any sort of permits. And
had they gone through an architect or just?
Oh no, he just built it.
He just built it. Okay.
It wasn't horrible, but the neighbors certainly hated it. They did not want a 3-story house in their very rural neighborhood. But he every time he went out to get a permit, every time his contractor guy came in to get a permit, the guy ended up building something new on the property. And so then they have to add to the plans and then come back in. Because part of the process is if you have a violation on your property and you do require to get a permit to rectify that violation, is the plans have to come in to one of the code enforcement officers. And we review the plans and the case to make sure that the violation is going to be resolved with whatever they're doing on that permit. We don't want to have somebody come in and say, oh, I got a permit, and they only got a permit for the garage conversion, and they didn't get a permit for,
Right.
the 3-room additions that they put on. We want to make sure that everything on that case is going ahead and everything that requires a permit is being addressed in those set of plans.
Okay.
So,
And that's fair.
yeah,
That makes
so they have to
sense.
come in and we review the plans. We'll go ahead and stamp it, saying that we're good with it, and then it goes down to permitting.
Okay. Well, definitely, there's some people out there who just do not want to follow directions
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah, just want to do their own thing.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you one final
Of
question,
course.
and this is kind of just for the moment. In your everyday life, when you're off duty, do you notice code violations? And if you do notice them, whether it's something minor, major, what do you do to go and rectify it? Do you go and report it yourself? Do you go and follow up? Do you pass it along? Are you waiting for something that's maybe a little bit more major?
So most properties have a code violation on them. There isn't a lot that don't have a code violation on it of some sort or another. And a lot of times it's a neighborhood standard. So if everyone in the neighborhood is fine with somebody having solid waste in their yard, we're not going out and looking for it. When I'm personally on just my own time cruising around and I notice something, I'll probably put it in the back of my mind. I do live in a different jurisdiction.
Mm-hmm.
I do live in a city, so the city would be the one that handles it. Some of the things coming and going, I do notice when I end up having, because part of my job is dealing with the homeless population. I do notice sometimes when they do set up a new camp somewhere that is my area, especially places that are very fire prone and places that we've been working towards getting people moved out and helping them out with services and that kind of thing. So I will notice if there is a new encampment, and I will go ahead and deal with that on my work day. But a lot of the times, I just kind of keep it in the back of my head for knowing either we have a case open on it already, or whether or not it's going to be reported in the future.
Okay.
I do notice them for sure.
You do notice
Yeah, I do notice it. But because if it's not actively affecting the community that the violation is existing, if it's not affecting that community, then we have plenty of things that are affecting the community that we want to go ahead and use our time and resources on.
Right, you want to use your time
Yeah,
wisely.
yeah. We would like to. We are very reactive instead of proactive for a lot of things, and so we want to try and go ahead and handle what we already have on our plates.
Well, that makes sense. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. We really appreciate you doing this interview with us. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.